Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Age of Wonders Planetfall. So today we're going to be talking about the Amazon Promethean combination, and this one's going to be fairly short, but is actually quite interesting. So starting off here, we know that there's those really strong protocols and doctrines that you can enact as the Amazons. We won't be talking about those too much, but one thing to note is that it is really nice that they're capable of doing these powerful economy builds that they have access to. So next up, we've got access to the Phoenix Armament Protocol as well as the Phoenix Colonization Protocol. This could be important if you happen to have really weird spawns, but Phoenix Colonization Protocols, just as under normal circumstances, not as good as having another doctrine up and running. So not really my favorite there. However, Phoenix Armament Protocol, 25% cheaper to build, and their upkeep costs are reduced by 25%. This is actually really fantastic, being a good way to get a larger army out into the field there pretty quickly. I do think that this is pretty much the strongest one there. Now, normally I would say that the Prometheans have got good overall doctrines. Extermination Protocols is, under a lot of circumstances, pretty good, and Phoenix Defense Protocols is situationally okay, but because they're competing against such powerful doctrines from the Amazon side of things, I think that there really is a lot less interesting to say about the extermination protocols, and certainly like Phoenix Defense Protocols really goes down the wayside when you compare them to the economy bonuses that you could be getting. Similarly, you probably are not going to be taking advanced wildlife militarization here, just because you probably aren't going for a mounted or beast style build with these guys, and you may not end up taking ecological warfare, although there are plenty of good reasons to still take ecological warfare. So I do think that there's some weird shakeups going on here just because of the way that the technology tree works. But for the most part, the relatively okay stuff from Promethean gets shoved aside by the Amazon's really powerful doctrines. So next up, let's talk about the military side of things. So first of all, of course, you've got Tactical Protection giving you the Purification Field. Because this is a free action, this is a really powerful ability. It's really cheap. It gets rid of those negative status effects there. It's free, and it's giving you 15, well, free action, and it's giving you a little bit of extra healing as well. I find that this is a great way as well to keep your units topped off. Just pop a bunch of purification fields if you've got any at the end of a battle. Like when there's one enemy left who's definitely going to die, just have everyone with purification fields use them. Make sure that all of your units are full health there, and then kill that guy and end the battle then. Just a really great all-around, easy-to-use kit there. Next up, you get access to Hazmat Protection. This is completely redundant for the Amazons, but if you really need it for some damn reason, you could take it. It's strictly speaking just purely worse than Regenerative Bioregulator, and it's also worse than the Blightbringer. The reason that it's nice is that it's much earlier, so I guess that if you really need to, the Hazmat Protection could be used then. I wouldn't even think about using this if I was against another Amazon Xenoplague player, because like they're just gonna probably focus on using something else. Like if I was the Amazon Xenoplague player, all of my shit would have Volatile Affliction, so I'd have Infusion Ionic on literally just all of my shit. So you wouldn't be able to protect against it using that stuff. Yeah, they'd be able to use Grounding Harnesses, but that is nowhere near as bad as them throwing Parax absorption panels onto Purifier units and then having like the Hazmat stuff stacked on top of there. Like they would be literally invulnerable to my attacks if I did not switch it out to Volatile Afflictions. Every other faction combination in the game is going to have other forms of attacks. So there's no reason for them to there's no reason for you to focus that heavily on Hazmat Protection unless you're against the most stubborn player in the world. Next up, you have the Thermal Targeting Relay. Again, this is a fantastically efficient upgrade there, plus 20% accuracy, plus 30% damage if you're up against anything that's on fire, and it is really easy for this combination to set things on fire. One of the nice things about this faction, of course, is that they can scan the enemies with the Biomancers, and sometimes with your heroes as well if you happen to have that sort of ability unlocked there. This makes it so that you're capable of burning units a little bit more easily since they lose 2 points of fire resistance, although I think that's actually just the damage. I'd have to double check if that even actually works that way. But regardless, you're going to be lighting everything on fire, so the Thermal Targeting Relay is just a really big boost to accuracy and damage for really cheap. There are stronger and more powerful upgrades out there, yes, but this one's really inexpensive. Next up, you get the Purifier unit itself. Now, the Amazon Purifier is unique. If we were to take a look at it and compare it, it's a little bit more like the Vanguard one in some senses there. The Vanguard repeater, Plasma Repeater, has a range of 7, but also has the same sort of damage there. And the Amazon's kind of the closest one to that there. If we take a look at most of these guys, like the Kiriko one, this is more like a shotgun. So it's capable of moving full speed, but then also blasting you for a good amount of damage, but does not have as much potential damage. It's also got that 5 range, same as the Amazons on paper, but the Amazons maintain visual acuity like you get from the Huntresses. So plasma bows actually have got that range of 6 while also having repeating attacks, meaning that they can deal essentially 30 damage if they stand still. And even getting that 20 damage if they move just a little bit. So the only time that they're going to be less on damage is if they have to move at full distances. But if you're doing that, you can launch a plasma bomb, which also benefits from that visual acuity, which means that you're firing your plasma bombs 1 tile longer range than anyone else's purifiers. So this is a really, really powerful ability that they are capable of using here. One of the other nice things about this is that the thermal resistance and the thermal resistant plating here means that these units are a little bit harder to get rid of for enemies that are relying on thermal attacks against Amazons. Normally, thermal is a great damage channel against Amazons. And the reason for that is that Amazons have a lot of units that are quite powerful, like the Arborean Sentinels, that have a -2 weakness against thermal attacks. Because you have so many units that are resistant to thermal attacks thanks to Promethean, it's really hard to go that route against this combination, which sort of covers for that weakness there. Next up, we have access to the Pyrrhix absorption panels. I'm still not sure how to pronounce this. This is also quite nice here. It gives you that ability to stand in that panel to get access to extra damage, as well as to gain a bunch of resistances and immunities. Now, this is actually a really, really great upgrade if you're going for a Lancer heavy build. What you can do is just have a couple purifiers in the back, like 2 purifiers, and then have 4 lancers, and have those lancers sort of run on top of the fires that you lay down with the purifiers. And since they'll have the absorption panels, they'll gain a bunch of extra damage, they'll heal a bunch, they have that sort of innate thermal resistance, and they're not taking any damage for standing in the fires there. So it's just a really, really powerful combination if you sort of are deciding to run things that close way. You can also use these, of course, by just laying down carpets of fire and then standing in them, but that means you're not launching those carpets of fire at your opponents, which does mean you're missing out on a lot of potential damage. So I always think of the Pyrrhix absorption panels as being way, way stronger if you're capable of throwing something that's fire resistant into melee. I don't think that the Aegis tank is really that necessary for this sort of combination there. Your damage output is just quite decent, and you're not going for a very slow grind, I find, with the Amazon combination there. In addition, I do still think that Huntresses and Biomancers and stuff like that are decent units to have a couple around. And because they're capable of shutting down enemy offense so effectively, you don't need the Aegis effectively for this combination. Instead, what you're better off doing is blinding a couple enemy units if you get a chance to, or if you need to, you can put a unit to sleep or whatever, so you don't have to rely on the protection of the Aegis tanks as much as you would with other factions. Next up, you've got the superheated plasma actuators. This is not really that useful. I find it's more effective to go for long-range artillery stuff on the purifiers, and then once they get in close, I like having them with a little bit of defensive modules on there. So this could be used to really ramp up your damage if you really wanted to, but immolation, if you hit a unit a bunch of times with a bunch of attacks and you're using those thermal targeting relays, usually you'll kill a unit before you get a ton of mileage out of immolation. So superheated plasma actuators I don't find are super, super good, but they are okay if you decide to go for a build that just sprays down a bunch of fire. I think that the superheated plasma actuators is actually better for units that don't have repeating attacks, because in those cases you don't get as much benefit out of the thermal targeting relay. In those cases, you've got a single shot, you hit them, you get a bunch of immolation, you get a ton of damage, whereas when you've got repeating attacks, what you can do is you can hit them with that first attack there, it lights them on fire, and then the second 2 attacks gain the bonus damage. So a little bit less useful for that when you're talking about the superheated plasma actuators. Backlash projectors, again, this is a great module if you're going to put them onto your Lancers. There's some fun and interesting combinations that you can do with those guys. Phoenix Walker Core, I don't find that these guys are super useful. They're a bit slow and clunky, and they're very expensive. I would much rather use Lancers for the general gist of this, but things like Firestorm and Torrent of Flame can be used effectively, as well as being in conjunction with Lancers. The reason is that these guys are capable of sort of jumping into an area, dealing a bunch of damage with Firestorm that lights that whole area on fire for a couple turns, which means that you can get a bunch of extra damage out of your Lancers, who are probably going to be running Pyrex absorption panels, so they can synergize together pretty decently. This can also be used to bodyguard against a bunch of melee type rushes, but I'm not fighting against those typically. And realistically, you can burn out melee rushes pretty effectively before they can get in close anyhow. Next up is the Phoenix Bomb Launchers. These things are fantastic for these guys because you can also apply visual acuity to them. This means that you're capable of getting off bombs from a longer distance. They're already a very, very powerful upgrade. Throwing these guys onto Huntresses or onto your purifiers, either of those units, they're going to gain a ton of benefit from that. Just a really, really great module. I think that's going to be one of the things that a lot of people want to have a couple of, no matter what, when they're playing as Prometheans. Alright, so next up, we do have to talk a little bit about their damage channels. You're probably not going to be focusing on their biochemical channel in this particular case here. Even when you're talking about the Huntresses with their bio damage, you're going to want the thermal targeting relay, but you don't really need anything else. Just let other people do a bit of shooting first to light them on fire, and then throw in some shots with the thermal targeting relay. However, you do have access to the incinerator module, which is going to pair nicely with that thermal targeting relay. And you have got a bunch of units that use lasers, so being able to do that again is quite effective. The units that you are capable of are the Lancer, as I previously mentioned, which is not in your tech tree. Then you've got access to the Arborean Sentinel, which is capable of using that laser cannon, the Harrier, which has a bunch of laser attacks, your Scout, which I forgot to mention, also has laser attacks, as well as the Pteranodon, which has laser attacks. For me, the best options are the Arborean Sentinel, in this case, the Lancer, and if you're going for air, of course, then the Harrier is the better option. I find that your Scout in this combination is a little bit squishy if they take a bunch of the fire upgrades. Any of these units can be used as a sort of incinerator module thermal targeting relay one, since they all have repeating attacks, and those all really work well in conjunction with one another. The only problem is that unfortunately you can't use the superheated plasma actuators with those units there, so it does run into that sort of situation. For me, the best combination is actually going for the Lancers, because there's a bunch of things that you can do that's interesting with the Pyrex absorption panels. But if you're using sort of a gun line, you can actually get a lot of use out of the Arborean Sentinels, because they're just a very, very powerful, tough unit that can sort of be used to frontline, while your purifiers further back can throw artillery shells. The only problem with these guys is that they don't get the best offensive upgrades from this combination. Now, for the rest of the stuff here, Grounding Harness is going to be good if you're up against a ton of things that have the arc attacks there. Other than that, you're probably not really needing it with this faction all that much there. You're a lot less reliant on things that are mechanical, I find, just because you're not using those Aegis tanks or anything like that. And you're probably going to be using a lot of Purifiers, which do okay against arc damage. They're not really anything special. Primal Awareness Amplifier, again, just a purely scouting tool. The Advanced Instinct Control, you're not going for as many animals with this combination, so it's not really as useful. But if you do decide to go for a build that is going to use a lot of cavalry, for example, even this one I would skip out on, just because there are better ones. This is good early, you would skip out on it later. Regenerative Bioresonance here for the Regenerative Bioregulator. This is not necessarily too necessary for this combination. It is still pretty good there. Crushing Roots, this is actually pretty strong if you are going for the Arborean Sentinel type build there, but it's kind of unnecessary to go that route in my opinion. It's usually, you can use a really weird build where you've got a bunch of Arborean Sentinels running around with some Purifiers, and the Purifiers just light everything on fire while you're tanking things out with the Arborean Sentinels. And while they're tanking, they can just use Crushing Roots to gain a ton of extra damage over time through those entanglements, just keep people locked in the fire, and then to stand there healing while having your improved defense means that your opponent's never going to be able to kill you. It's a thing you could potentially do. I don't really necessarily think that's the most interesting way to play it, but some people might. Next up, you get the Blood Fury Inducers. You're probably not going to be getting a ton of biological cyborg or Arborean units dying in your fights here with this combination, so you're probably not going to get a ton of use out of this one. There are other ways to do that. And then you've got the Earthlink Mask here. Normally, I would say this is fantastic, but you just really don't need that badly. The nice thing about this is that it would let you apply crushing entanglement, which is really powerful, keeping people locked into a fire for a little bit longer. But usually, if you're throwing a ton of attacks at people and the area that they're on fire and all this other stuff, it kind of doesn't matter as much. But Earthlink Mask is actually a really powerful attack that you can apply to people here. Spirit Link module, this is the one that I would upgrade to if I was using mounted units. It's quite a powerful one there. Now, to a certain extent, I would ignore things like the Arborean Queen, and even I would ignore the Pteranodon. It's just too expensive, even though it does have that laser cannon. And I would probably actually ignore the Bombardon. Normally, the Bombardon's actually a really good unit. The Bioshell Bombardment is a pretty powerful artillery strike, but you've got, like, just really cheap artillery strikes that you can just spam out on your basic troops, so why would you really bother taking the Bombardon in that case? Especially because this is actually outranged by 1 point by the Phoenix Bomb Launcher on an Amazon Huntress, so this is just not necessary for your combination there, unless you really want to have... I'm not even sure when I would want this in this combination, actually. Excuse me. So anyway, let's take a look at our units here. So we started off with the Wild Swiftbeak, who didn't really upgrade that at all. Now, our Huntresses, we can easily upgrade these guys with the Phoenix Bomb Launcher, and this is a really powerful upgrade. One of the things that we can also do is replace this with the Earthlink Mask. This provides some interesting stuff here. One thing that's really weird is that you can actually use this combination to, like, fire off a single shot there with a 12 strength chance to apply Crushing Entanglement, which is super ridiculous. The problem is that this does make them very expensive, which is the only reason that I, generally speaking, will stick with the Thermal Targeting Relay. The other reason that I stick with the Thermal Targeting Relay is that if I've hit someone with the Phoenix Bomb Launcher and I've applied Immolate to them, and I'm able to fire at them the next turn for whatever reason, it's so much damage to your opponent that they'll probably be dead. But if I was playing much more competitively, strictly speaking, being able to fire 10 tiles away using the Earthlink Mask Phoenix Bomb Launcher, this makes it literally impossible for certain unit compositions to really fight you, because they're going to be stuck in place in the immolation while you're sort of, like, next turn maybe they clear a couple of them and they can try and advance a little bit, but then you hit them with other ones that are capable of doing the same thing, and they're just completely screwed. It's really unfair. So the other thing you could potentially do if you're going full crazy person is throw on regenerative bioregulators, because it's a little bit more powerful than the purification field, and if everybody's got access to these, then you're capable of having a unit that's pretty much just unkillable, because you've got the regenerative bioregulator, and then you've got the ability to plant roots, meaning that you're healing 20 a turn, you've got super armor, and you're stagger immune. So this is a combination that's ridiculously expensive for a basic troop, and I would never really recommend it, but it's such a powerful combination that it's one that you want to sort of keep in mind is possible. So anyway, we've also got access to the Biomancer. This Biomancer, I generally don't throw the Phoenix Bomb Launchers on them, because you have so many different units that can use it a little bit better that I just don't think it's really that necessary. In fact, I've been running these guys with 0 upgrades, because what they're really here to do is throw down scan and sleep if something needs it. And you can keep these guys in the back line and keep them in a safe spot there. And as well, they can throw another mend if you need to. Honestly speaking, the only real change, like even the Purification Field causes you to sort of run these guys up into closer quarters than I would really ever care to under normal circumstances. There's just not a ton you need these guys to have when you're playing the Promethean combination, because other people that are up front and badly need it, they can have their own Purification Field, so you just don't need to run these guys up to do it. So I think that this is a unit that you really are just using to scan catalog stuff and don't really need to throw upgrades on them. For the Harrier, if I was going to be playing one of these guys, I would throw on the Incinerator module, the Targeting Relay, and then the Spirit Link module. This would make for a unit that's capable of dealing a decent amount of damage. As soon as you get that first burn down there, it's capable of dealing even more. Having access to the Spirit Link module is capable of giving you some pretty good criticals there. It doesn't have the best in terms of morale, but it is pretty decent. You are capable of getting quite a decent amount of extra damage out of the Spirit Link modules as well. And 20% harder to hit is really good for flying units, I tend to find, so this would be a pretty powerful upgrade there. If I wanted to go for a slightly different combination, you can throw Phoenix Bomb Launchers on these guys, which is kind of interesting because it is a mounted unit. This makes it, as far as I'm aware, the only mounted unit that's flying unit that's capable of equipping Phoenix Bomb Launchers. and I just am not entirely sure why I would want to throw one of these on these guys unless I was on a sort of water map or something like that and just needed a lot of air presence. Another thing I could do is throw on the regenerative bioregulator. This just makes it so that the units are capable of flying around and being a bit more durable, but you're sort of trading off that extra dodge chance if you do that. Not my favorite type of unit just because I tend not to play air, but it is something you can do. The Shrike is a similar type of unit there. It's not mounted, however, so that means you're missing out on a lot of stuff there. Because of that, you're going to probably be just throwing on something like Regenerative Bioregulator, Incinerator Module, and potentially the Advanced Instinct Controller. This is a relatively fragile unit, but if you throw in the extra Wildlife buff there, you're capable of bringing this guy up to 50 hit points, and you can get a decent amount of toughness on him, as well as being able to throw down flaming attacks and stuff like that. Unfortunately, as you can see, I cannot throw on the thermal targeting relay, so the scouts for this faction just probably are better off scouting. If you really want to go for air, the Harrier is actually better in this case. So next up we got the Lancer. For this particular build, because I was not going for a particularly dedicated melee type build, this is what I have here, the thermal targeting relay. This is not very good for these guys because ultimately you don't need the accuracy boost, but what's nice about this is that it's a cheap mod that gives you plus 30% damage, which is really, really powerful. Being able to add the incinerator module as well to light people on fire is a pretty decent way to sort of make sure that you're getting that. And then you've got the purification field. Now, if I was going for a more dedicated rush and expending more on these guys, I would definitely throw on the Purex absorption panels, just because I'd be throwing in stuff that makes the area that they're in on fire, making it so that they can get access to the thermal targeting relay without having to rely on the incinerator module. You don't always need to use the incinerator module anyway, but we can throw on, in this case, the backlash projectors, which gives us the ability to deal extra damage around us to enemies as we're getting attacked. So with this combination, we just run into a fire and just start stabbing for that extra 30% damage there. It might not look like the highest amount of damage, but that's because 20% of that is not applying there. So it's actually like 16 per hit. It's a really, really powerful sort of combination. I think it's one that you would potentially want to try because it's actually a lot of fun to play as well. So next up, we've got access to our Arborean Sentinels, as you can see here. We've equipped ours with the Incinerator module, as well as the Advanced Instinct Controller and the Regenerative Bioregulator. Now, this one I just didn't get a chance to switch out, but I actually want to switch this out for Crushing Roots. Crushing Roots is actually really, really powerful for this combination, like I said there. Lets me cast these Thorn Roots and gives those people a lot of damage over time. And applying Crushing Roots while they're standing in a bunch of fire is just ridiculously gross. It makes it so that your opponent is pretty much incapable of doing anything productive. While these guys have Manipulate Shield up, these guys are also ridiculously tanky and durable against enemy ranged units. And if you're going for a build that's capable of locking down people like a bunch of Arborean Sentinels, which I didn't get a chance to build in this game, unfortunately, but they are fun. I built one or two and they both died, but these guys are actually a really, really tough unit when they've got access to Crushing Roots. You could also replace the this thing with the Regenerative Bioregulator, make these guys pretty much impossible to kill, but yeah, it's just a consideration that you might want to have there. Alright, next up we've got access to the Purifiers, and the Purifiers that we've got here are pretty basic. We've got the Thermal Targeting Relay, we've got the Purification Field, and we've got the Phoenix Bomb Launchers. Pretty basic stuff there. Our Plasma Bow, again, gets up to 6 range thanks to Visual Acuity. Plasma Bombs, range 8, hitting target out to 9. If you include the area of effect there, you've got the Purification Field in this case, and then you've got the Launch Phoenix Bombs. So being able to apply all of these burning states to the ground there, this can synergize well with anything, but I find that just spamming these guys out by themselves is very, very effective. Just having them on their own, throwing fire everywhere, and then finishing anything else off with the Plasma Bow once they get in close because of how high the DPS is on the Plasma Bow means that you're going to do fine against almost anything you can imagine. There's not a whole lot creative that you have to do to be effective with this combination here. So next up we've got access to a couple monsters and animals. I haven't really upgraded them. They don't necessarily take the best upgrades from the Prometheans, so as you can see there, we don't really get anything useful from Promethean on these guys here. I guess there's the Purex absorption panels and some of the stuff, but realistically speaking, you're looking at a situation where you're not getting things that you want to be getting on there. I guess these Vine Buds could use things like the Backlash projectors, but realistically speaking, I don't tend to use that sort of stuff, those upgrades. So yeah, that happens to be all of the units that we've got available here. You'll notice that there were actually a couple different playstyles I mentioned. I do like that, despite how simple it looks. There are a couple interesting things that you can do with the Promethean combination. For what is most powerful, I would say that just spamming purifiers is both very viable and very, very powerful for this faction. But you can play it a little bit differently, and I think that those other ways of playing it, especially like purifiers mixed with lancers, is way, way more fun than playing this one. Or playing like Arborean Sentinels with crushing, as well as the ability to throw out a bunch of fire hazards and stuff like that is also really, really good, like the damage over time sort of build there. Any of that sort of stuff would work really, really well in my opinion. So anyway, let's take a look at our armies here. This one's pretty simple. It's just Biomancers, some Purifiers, a Vine Bud, and a Hero. Over here we've got access to a Hero, a couple Purifiers, a couple Huntresses, and a Swiftbeak. And our armies are actually quite small because this game ended really, really early. This was a really quick one. And part of that's because I got an alliance with these guys here. So these guys, as you can see, are my best buds there. And because of that, we're able to win faster than we normally would be allowed to. So that's just a luck thing. Normally I would have to turn around and fight them as well, and we'd end up with larger armies than we have in this particular game. But such is life sometimes. Over here, we're starting another army. It's just got a Hero and a Purifier. We're starting to keep production of those Purifiers wherever possible. I'm trying to remember where my next army is, and I think there's one up around somewhere. Let's just hit here, hit military. Yep, here there. So we got over here another Commander, a Magma Basher, Valerie, because we had that quest, Purifier, a Biomancer, and an Amazon Huntress. So pretty much just spam of those sort of units. You still end up with a couple of variety there, a little bit of variety. You do actually want to throw in those Huntresses whenever you need to. Just having one or two of them for every Purifier, or yeah, like just having a couple around in every army stack is going to be good because of the ability to throw out those blinding arrows, which really is your defensive option. It really makes it so that you're a lot safer. Yeah, other than that, you're primarily relying on your Prometheans. So anyhow, that is going to be our video for today. A pretty simple one, pretty straightforward faction, pretty straightforward way of doing things, the Prometheans. But I hope you found this episode enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you guys all next time.